it's okay that you're in that relationship. Take it easy on yourself. You don't have to punish yourself for staying in that relationship or for not taking the job. Once you become aware of the signals that your body sends you, because your body knows you best.
Very often, high achievers, high performers are under the impression that it's because they're so hard on themselves that they were able to get great results.
Your heart, your emotions. And when you build this bubble, your personal space, you make it strong, right? Then if you fail, it doesn't shake you to your core.
Discuss today's topic. So, you recently launched a book, Becoming a Peacock, and the whole concept is around self love and self compassion. What's one thing that you discovered that you didn't expect as you were writing this book?
I kind of thought that I'd been through everything when I'd already processed everything. But the more I wrote about my own experiences, because the book is it's a memoir, but it's also a practical self-love guide. And the more I wrote it, it felt really a lot more healing for me as well. So that was unexpected, to see once again how wonderful it is to write, journaling and writing, how, it can support your therapeutic process and help your self-discovery. So that was unexpected for me in the process.
Amazing. And when it comes to this topic, why do you feel it's so important to discuss this and to work on our relationship with ourselves and our self compassion?
Well, I think everything kind of connects to self-love, whether or not you behave in a self-loving manner, it kind of shows you how much you're ready to live a happy life. It affects your happiness every single day in every part of your life. So I think figuring out what you need to do, what kind of choices you need to make in order to act in a more self-loving way in your everyday life is going to correlate with your level of happiness. So I think it's really crucial.
Yes, and I think that very often people aren't aware that they lack self-compassion. I remember the first time I sort of realized this, it was maybe a decade ago. I was at a workshop and the woman who was a coach, she guided us and she asked us to reflect a bit on the inner voice and how critical we are towards ourselves. And that was the first time that I realized how hard I was on myself. And it was quite a shock. And I think many people listening don't actually realize that they maybe lack self-compassion or that they're highly critical towards themselves. So how can they gain more awareness and start to better understand their own sort of inner dialogue and if they are compassionate towards themselves or not?
Well, that's basically the concept of my book, because I think to understand that in the simplest way is to take a look at the choices that you're making in your everyday life. So the same was for me. I thought I was a self-loving person for years. I thought I was pretty, I thought I was smart, and all these, I thought, I had positive thoughts towards myself, right? But at the time, and I was in my 20s, my therapist told me that I didn't love myself. And I was like, I thought I do. And in the book, I have this sentence that I say in the beginning, and it's like, I think, and I still believe, and I confronted this with her, and my therapist agreed that she was always thinking, if you did love yourself, you wouldn't be dating this, I'm sorry, asshole who treats you so badly. And that's the thing. If you take a look at your choices, you understand whether or not you're making choices that a self-loving person would make. If you're choosing to stay in a relationship that you don't deserve. They're treating you in a way that makes you feel less, or they're treating you in a way that makes you unhappy, makes your self-esteem go lower. Anything that doesn't feel good for you in your body or in your emotions, it's just that you understand that's not the choice that you need to be making. And that goes for every type of choices that we have in our everyday lives. We have so many choices we have to make. How do you talk to yourself? Who are you with? Who are your friends? What kind of job are you taking? Are you taking any breaks? There's so many minor and large choices that you need to make in everyday lives. And when you take a look at those choices, you can understand whether or not you're making the ones that actually a self-loving person would make.
Yes, I can totally see that both with relationships or in a job or what we eat. And what sometimes happens is people think, okay, I know any old example, right? I know I need to go to bed earlier, and yet they can't seem to go to bed earlier. Or I know I should drink less alcohol, or I know I should, But then what often happens is a lot of guilt and even more strong inner critic, right? I think we've all experienced this where we sort of know deep down that these behaviors are maybe unhealthy for us physically or mentally and don't do us any good. But then it's quite rare, unless you train it, that the self-compassion comes in. Generally, it's more guilt, more inner critic, and that often makes things worse. So how can you break out of that spiral when you notice that you may be in a job that doesn't support you in terms of your joy and meaning, or you're in a relationship that's unhealthy for you, or that you have these unhealthy habits that don't do the best for you? How can you break out of this vicious cycle of just feeling bad about it and having even more guilt, and actually to shift from a more and get more compassionate towards yourself?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to be to put less pressure on ourselves. It's okay that you're in that relationship. Take it easy on yourself. You don't have to punish yourself for staying in that relationship or for not taking the job. To be understanding, to be compassionate for yourself. It's okay that, okay, this is my need right now. For some reason, I am choosing to be here. Try to understand, analyze why you're staying in this relationship. What need is it fulfilling at this moment? So try to first of all understand the reasons behind what it is that you're doing. So why you're staying or why you're not doing what you should be doing in a way. And the next step is maybe to take a small step. You don't have to make big changes immediately because that's more difficult, obviously. So, okay, you know what? I can change this. I can go to bed maybe half an hour earlier today. Or maybe, you know what? Okay, I'm going to stay in this relationship now, but I know this is not what I deserve. So what is it that, deep down, take a look inside and see what it is that's keeping you there. And when you start to believe and understand why you're there, and then you can say to yourself, is that what I deserve? Why do I believe that this is all I deserve? So once you start to analyze your own behavior, you can probably also understand that, I deserve more. Why do I believe that it's okay to be treated this way? And then because once you accept that, then it's very hard. It's much harder to stay in that relationship once you know you deserve more. This is something that happened in class 2 weeks ago. One of my students, it was such a tough conversation for her because, she was talking about how her boyfriend made her feel. And the more she talked about it, the more it became clear that she was staying in a toxic relationship, emotionally abusive. And, she started to cry because she said that he made her feel like she wasn't pretty. She said she doesn't want to be intimate with him anymore because she feels ashamed of her own body. So, I mean, and of course, the tears dropping down your face, you're like, it's hard to deny what you know inside, because once you've expressed that, once you've admitted that, then comes, I think, the steps that you can actually take to make that change.
Yeah, so admitting it and understanding it, and then baby steps. And I think the example you just gave can really be, parallel to anything, because people feel that way about staying in a relationship in their work, where they're working for a company maybe where they don't feel treated well, or they feel diminished, or their boss is not nice, or it's just a relationship towards themselves where they're constantly criticizing themselves, they're always mean about themselves. And I know that has brought me to tears, several times, where just the inner voice was so loud and so critical and so dismissive that it sort of beats you down. And so it's quite nice to know, okay, understanding it, obviously knowing that you're not your thoughts is pretty helpful in those moments, knowing that this is just a conditioned pattern that somehow you acquired along the way, and breaking out of it through baby steps. So what are some of the practical tools? I know you share quite a few of them in the book, but what are some of the practical tools that helped you once you had an understanding that this was something important for you, and once you started to do baby steps like being in healthier, happier relationships and not tolerating things that weren't good for you physically and mentally? What were some of the tools that you applied to keep you on track in the sense of self-compassion and not slip down the road back to sort of highly critical?
Well, listening to my body is one thing. So I'm a dance movement therapy. And once you become aware of the signals that your body sends you, because your body knows you best, right? And for me, I get all these messages. My hands can get tingly if I'm doing something that doesn't feel right. If it's making me very anxious or uncomfortable, I get a cold sore. So it's like, listen to your body. And once you take the messages, then it's easier to apply. So for me, having the thought in my mind and then taking my body as a tool to also implement my thoughts, like, just taking the time to stay grounded is one thing, because when you feel uncomfortable, I think moving and coming to your strength in your body helps you apply that in your life as well. So moving with that, using your breath when you feel anxious, like these kind of things, and just writing when I feel uncomfortable with anything is also something that, just practically helps. But also really looking into my decisions and why would I be making this decision at this moment if it feels uncomfortable, is something that I try to look at. That helps me.
Yeah. I love the part about the body, but I think we get lost when we go to the mind. I think it's a lot wiser to go to the body. You have that gut feeling when it's the right decision or when it's something that's off, when it doesn't feel right. And the body knows generally a lot faster than the mind, a lot more accurately. And in the mind, we can get confused because we go all logical. So if we have a choice between taking a project and not taking it in our work, the logic might say, these are 10 reasons why you should take it, these are 10 reasons not to take it. And then you're sort of going back and forth, feeling quite confused. But if you just listen to the body, it'll either be a hell yes or a hell no. And then it's pretty easy, right? Most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even doing that, 10 reasons and 10 reasons yes or no, putting yourself in different parts of the room and, okay, how does it feel in my body here? This is the yes, this is the no. Your body will change, and I have this thing, it's like your body is like your emotional thermometer. It tells you when you're feeling uncomfortable. It tells you when you're feeling good and bad. And just that anxiety level, especially in your relationships, that will tell you whether you're in a good relationship or you're in an unhealthy relationship. Your body will probably tell you. Just listen to your body.
Yes, I think it's pretty immediate. And the first part, like you said, is to admit it in the example, for instance, that you shared in the class. And then once you've admitted it, understanding why that person's still staying, or in other examples, why they're still indulging in unhealthy habits, what we're getting out of it. There's always a secondary gain. And then from then, I love your approach of just baby steps, because again, most of the people listening or watching this episode tend to be high achievers, and so baby steps can be a bit of a challenge with high achievers. We always going to go all in and do 200%, but the truth is, if we're radically changing our behaviors or quitting relationships or changing work environment, doing it radically is often quite challenging, not, and sometimes not even totally possible. So this sort of smaller baby step approach is already leading into a more compassionate version for a high achiever. That's already quite a challenge.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm thinking now when it comes to this idea of like being more compassionate towards ourselves and talking about how high achievers, very often high achievers, high performers are under the impression that it's because they're so hard on themselves that they were able to get great results in their life, whether it's in fitness, if they exercise a lot, or if they're athletes professionally, or in business. And they're often under this impression. How can they break out of it? Because it's very challenging very often for high achievers to let go of that inner critic or being very hard on themselves, because they believe that that's what helped them to be more successful.
So I think it's more important to feel, because I think being goal oriented for leaders is just that's their definition of what success is going to be, or what, like, I'm going to be more worthy, I'm going to be a better leader if I achieve this goal, or if I get this position. But I think we need to take a look at what meaning you're putting on to these goals, because if you believe that that will define your worthiness as a leader, or if that is going to define whether or not you're a very successful person or not, then you put all that pressure on yourself, and that's what makes you think that is going to make you a better person, but it's actually not. So I think they need to change their perspective in terms of, what, whether or not I achieve this goal is not going to make me a better leader, or a better or more successful CEO. I will do this because I can, but I don't have to. And I will not be a worse leader or will not be less successful if I don't. Does that make sense?
I think that makes total sense. I think intellectually, this is something that probably most people would get, but emotionally, very often there's a need almost physiologically to achieve, like you said, certain goals and to prove their self-worth. And very often, I mean, I like what Jim Carrey says, which is that he wishes that everyone could have the same amount of success as he did, just so they realize that that's not it. And very often, I think people can't realize it until they've actually achieved goals. Because beforehand, if you've always dreamt of having whatever X amount of figures business or whatever it is, right? The Nobel Prize if you're a researcher, or win the Olympics if you're a fitness person, and that's been like your goal for like a decade, it can be very difficult, I think, for a person to think whether you get this or not, you're still equally worthy. Now, I agree on the principle intellectually, of course, a person's worth is independent of the results they achieve, but very often that's not how it feels to them. So again, I'm wondering, like, how can people maybe have that wisdom without going through the Jim Carrey journey and get to need to have a huge level of success or burn out or sacrifice their health and their relationship to realize, oh, right, that's not actually the point.
That can be difficult to do. I mean, there's no practical way to like, okay, do this and you're going to understand it, you know? But I think just like if you think about your child or if you think about your best friend, are you going to think that your child is more worthy when they achieve that goal or only when they are becoming a very successful leader? No, you believe they're worthy already because they are this special, unique, wonderful person. And every one of us are actually like that. You know, it's just a vision, I think, a mentality that you need to look at the world. And you have to give that same grace to yourself. So, you know, you deserve that much grace just as much as your child would or your best friend would. And I think if you put less pressure on yourself, you're probably going to be more successful anyway.
It's funny, that's exactly a vocal message I left to my closest friend a week ago, and it was talking exactly about that. Her worth in my eyes or in the people who are close to her in her life would totally independent of how she's doing in her career or her work. But it was funny, as I was leaving that vocal message, I thought, oh yeah, that's how other people feel about me, and that's not how I feel about myself. Isn't it interesting that we put on this extra pressure towards ourselves that we wouldn't really expect from another person?
Yes,
It's an
definitely.
interesting thing.
Yes.
Very interesting. In your book, you also talk about the importance of vulnerability, and vulnerability and self-compassion, I think, go really nicely together, because I feel that often when we lack self-compassion, we're also trying to display a certain persona of ourselves towards the world, and there's a lot of sort of hiding. So how can people go about letting go of that persona and being a bit more vulnerable?
That again, I think, is connected to your fear of how you're going to be perceived. If if you think it's okay to open up your emotions and look silly or look just exposed, and you're not afraid of that, that is actually, that requires more strength. That is what I define as being a strong person, being able to be vulnerable, being able to expose yourself, your weakest parts, your fears, your failures, and just to be vulnerable, open with your heart to people is going to give you much better connections. And you're going to feel much better about yourself. But of course, there is the risk of falling apart. But that's the good part of life. When you risk falling apart, you get to feel the best emotions, because that's where all the magic lies, I think, in a way. So I think being vulnerable allows you to feel much more and connect on a much deeper level with people, and you get much better experiences. So I think it requires more strength to be more vulnerable.
I totally agree with that. I want to continue a bit down this road, because I think vulnerability is such a fascinating topic, and also especially for leaders who, for instance, when facing their teams or their clients, often feel they can't be vulnerable because they think it's a weakness. And yet you just said, and I agree with you, that it's a strength. And so if they want to start on this journey of opening up a bit more, sharing things that are a bit more personal, being able to challenge, some of the perspectives they had, and maybe opening up about different traits, how can they shift? Because very often, if they've been in that position for 10 or 20 years, they're not used to opening up to their team about certain challenges or displaying certain emotions with some of their clients, for instance. What are some things that they can do to sort of let go a bit of this sort of pressure to be perfect. I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, in a sense, the way to do that would be to open up a little bit. Open the window. You don't have to open the whole door and expose yourself completely. Just show them a tiny bit of yourself and see how that feels, and you're going to enjoy it. It's like taking a small bite of this wonderful piece of cake, and you're going to enjoy it, and then you're going to want to have more. So I think once you see that there is no big fall of being vulnerable, and the wonderful feeling of connecting with someone, with your team, or with your friends on a deeper level is going to give you more benefits anyway. So once you take a baby step again in this direction this time, then I think it will be easier to open up the whole door and open yourself even deeper.
It's wonderful how you say that it feels good to be vulnerable, because I think for many people, when they think of the idea of vulnerability, it feels uncomfortable, it feels awkward, it feels the wrong thing to do. I think many people just shy away from it, but it's so true. I think all the relationships, all the connections, everything gets so much stronger, and other people then are more vulnerable and share deeply with
Yes.
you, and then it's at the end of the day, we're happy because we have happy relationships. So if we have great relationship with friends, colleagues, partner, family, then we feel happier. But that only happens if we're willing to share, the struggles, the hard times, the good times, and everything in between.
And it builds trust as well, like when you are vulnerable towards someone, you show them that you trust them, and that allows them to open up and trust you as well. And when you have trust, you're going to have a better connection as well. And that's what also happens to me with that's how I came to write this book. Like in my classes at the university, because it's very experiential, and we have to talk about our feelings and go through our emotions. For them to open up, what I do is actually talk a little bit about my experiences. When I talk about my failures, when I talk about my failed relationships or my heartbreaks, or even deeper issues, it shows them as a role model that it's okay. It's okay to fail. I have failed, so have you. It's okay. We can survive, and we can be stronger, and you can trust me that I will love you just the same. I will accept you just the same, and I will not judge you if you do not judge me. Not if, but it can be. It's a two-way street, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, there is a strong link with fear of failure and vulnerability. I do feel that if you're able to overcome this fear of failure and you're able to share some of the failures, hence being vulnerable, then it doesn't hold you back quite as much. So it'd be interesting to tie all this together. So we've explored sort of self-compassion and then vulnerability, and now looking at fear of failure. How do they all go together, and what can people do to overcome this? Because I think it's a huge obstacle for many people, and I know you address both the fear of failure and rejection in your book. So how can people deal with that? Because I think that can be quite paralyzing for many people.
I think to they have to have a definition of themselves that is stronger than whatever is outside. You have to have a sense of who you are, and you have to have this bubble around you that protects you from whatever it is that happens. So if your bubble is strong enough, you have to build that first internally. So know who you are, what you believe in, what your values are, your heart, your emotions. And when you build this bubble, your personal space, you make it strong, right? Then if you fail, it doesn't shake you to your core. If somebody says something negative to you, if they reject you, if you or if you break up with someone, and the person that you loved so deeply doesn't want you anymore, it's still okay, because your own center is grounded enough, your personal space is strong enough that it doesn't shatter with whatever happens to you. So when you build your sense of self first, internal out, then you have that strong belief that whatever happens to you is not going to change what you think about yourself, no matter what happens.
That's really beautiful, really, really powerful. I can see that, and I can see how in certain moments I was able to be more like that, and in other moments we become too dependent. on the external world or on external circumstances, or we create this dependence. I also feel that it's maybe because we live in a society that talks so much about the external world, talks so much about external success and results and achievements, and therefore sometimes I think we get lost and confused, and we value that more than the internal world. And obviously that's the wrong way around, but I think sometimes we just get a bit confused as to which way is the most important.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
totally right. And it's not just what happens to us. And I think sometimes even if you're a successful person, you've had children, you've made success. Like there was one actor who gave this example, and I really liked it because he said he was very successful, and for years it was his power in Hollywood that made him feel very strong, right? And then he had, I think, four children. He was very proud of himself as a father role. But then he became sick. He had cancer and he wasn't able to do his job and he wasn't able to be a good father in his own perspective. And he said, I felt unworthy. I felt like I didn't, I wasn't strong anymore. And it became clear to him that, he had put his sense of worthiness to the roles that he had. But just because he's sick at that moment, he can't fulfill these roles, doesn't actually make him any less worthy. He's just as worthy. He's just having a difficult time. And I think we need to separate what happens to us with our sense of worthiness. And that's also a very deep experience.
Yes, yes. What has helped you on this journey to reconnect with yourself and to create this sort of bigger, stronger internal world so that you're more resilient, really, because that's what it comes down to, more resilient to what can happen in the outside world?
A lot of failures, a lot of heartbreaks, and years of it where I too was defining myself with relationships or like, okay, I really love this person and he thinks that I'm a queen. Yay, I must be a queen, but when that relationship disappears, it's like, wait a minute, I'm no longer a queen. What happened to me being wonderful? I thought it was great. But you can't define yourself with that relationship, because if that relationship, and so many of relationships do disappear, so many of marriages disappear, and you can't define who you are with any relationship or any status. And it took me a long time to understand that. And once I really came to the bottom of what I was believing I deserved or what I didn't deserve, it took me a lot of self-reflection to do that. And I think trying to explain to my students as well, when I was teaching dance therapy at the university, and I still am, trying to make them feel strong and worthy is what has also helped me understand and help them along the way as well.
So how do you use dance therapy to help them to feel more worthy?
Well, the body is a way to hold ourselves, and the way to show self-love and self-affection. We use movement and our body as well. So touching ourselves in a self-loving manner helps us come to a state where we can actually accept ourselves, because we hold our body, we touch our body, and we actually, in our everyday lives, we do that to other people. How often is it that you hold yourself and you hug yourself, or you caress your face, showing compassion to yourself? You don't. I mean, most of us don't, at least, and we go through this in the beginning of the semester. The first thing we do is we rediscover our body. First of all, we try to move every single body part as if we're discovering our body as a child would, to once again remember that we have this huge potential, because as we grow up, we internalize patterns, the way we talk, the way we move, everything goes into routine. But actually, we have so much more capacity to think, to have different perspective, to change our vision, to change our mind, because when we change our perspectives, then we can change our actions, right? And a way to do that is actually by rediscovering our own potential in our movements as well. Because, we walk the whole time, and if we ask someone to dance, they'll do some dance move that they're used to. Like they've seen it on a dance floor as something, Saturday Night Live or whatever. It's all these patterns once again. But if you ask a child to dance, they're just going to move around freely, following their instincts, following whatever their body wants to do at that moment. And we lose that as we grow up. So what we first try to do in my class, at least with dance movement therapy, is once again to rediscover what it means to follow your instincts, to listen to your own needs and move with the intention of just feeling what it is you want to do, because we forget to listen to our needs, but our body can sense it. So if you move, if you remember, rediscover what it is to move, just listening to your body, you rediscover that you have this whole potential. So once again, we start in the beginning by rediscovering who we are, and then not just to discover it, but to accept and love every single body part, which makes up us, who we are. So it's not just, okay, look, these hands are okay, they can do this, they can clap, they can make sounds, they can be aggressive, they can welcome people, they can reach out to people, they can hold and love people. But you know what? Look at my amazing hands, and you give a kiss to your hands and tell your hands that they're amazing and beautiful. And okay, you know what? Every part of me is actually beautiful. And when you start to think that way, especially the parts of you that you think actually don't deserve love, you have these parts in your body where sometimes you're ashamed of them, or stretch marks for me, or, breasts that you feel are too big or too small, or your nose you think is, you know what? This nose is actually okay. I love my nose. It makes me breathe. It helps me breathe. These stretch marks are, they're the marks of my baby. And all these just once again, accepting who you are through your body is what we do in the beginning of the process.
Amazing, amazing. I'd love to go. If you were based in Stockholm, I'd love to go to that movement. I think there's a lot of freedom that comes from reconnecting with the body and from listening and accepting it. We're already approaching the end of the episode. What's one nugget that you'd like to leave with the audience around the topics that we've been discussing today?
You are a worthy person, no matter what happens to you, no matter your choices, no matter your background, your sexuality, your gender. You are worthy just as you are, and you don't have to change a thing about yourself unless you want to. And whatever it is that you do, show compassion and love to yourself first.
Thank you, Michal. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.